the Down Payment Towards Equity Act of 2021. This has just been released by the, I think it's the House Banking Committee. Chris, if you can look this up, if you can look up who proposed the Down Payment Toward Equity Act of 2021. Now, this is a proposal. Again, it's not yet a bill, but as we mentioned with the first segment, if you have a one-party control of both the House and the Senate in Congress, and you have the same party in control of the presidency, pretty much anything that comes out of committee can get passed unless you have a defector from the Democratic Party who doesn't like it. And reading through this Down Payment Toward Equity Act of 2021, let me tell you why this is a bad idea across the board. This basically recommends somewhere between a $20,000 and a $25,000 credit for first-time buyers. And for anybody who works in the real estate business, the appraisal business, the mortgage business, has been out shopping for a house or selling a house, what you know intrinsically is that we don't need any more demand for housing. Right now, and I'm going to get these numbers off a little bit. I'm trying to recall them from memory from a report I read about 2 weeks ago. In America right now, there's about 1,040,000 houses listed for sale. So there's listings, right? There's about a 1 month supply of houses based on how many buyers there are in the market. In a normalized market, there's about 3 months of inventory, houses on the market for all the buyers. There's currently less than 1 month of inventory, meaning if everybody who wanted to buy a house bought a house, how long would it take for that whole inventory to be depleted? So right now there's about 1,040,000 homes on the market in America. By the way, there's about 1 million licensed, registered real estate agents in America. So there's about a deal per realtor to go around. And if you figure there's a buyer side and a selling side, usually two different realtors representing, there's about 2 deals per realtor to go around right now, which is insane. The problem is there's about 7 million pre-approved buyers in America. And I'm not exactly sure how the quality control is on that number. I don't know where they come that up. I don't know if that's just a pooled average of what lenders are self-reporting, but the study that I read said that there's about 1,040,000 listings and there's about 7 million pre-approved buyers. And in every neighborhood in America, I coach loan officers from across the country, from LA to Jacksonville to Annapolis to Cincinnati, Ohio. Doesn't matter where you go in the country, there is way too many buyers for the amount of sellers who are on the market. The last thing the market needs is for the government to pour lighter fluid on the buy side or the demand side of the equation and create more people who want to buy by giving out this $20,000 or $25,000 first-time home buyer credit. It's absurd. All it's going to do is create more demand on a product that is already in short supply, which if we go back to Economics 101, or if you're like me and you didn't finish Economics 101 because you didn't finish college, read the book Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, you will remember that as supply decreases and demand increases, what happens? Prices go up. So this is just your typical example of the government saying, oh my God, housing is so expensive. We should do something. We have to do something, because if we don't do something, we'll look like we have inaction and we look like we don't care about the people. So what do we do when we do something? We got to do something because there's something bad happening. So they're going to do something, which is release a program like this that is actually has the counter effect to what they're trying to do. They want housing to, presumably, if you believe them, they want housing to be more affordable. They want more people to be able to buy houses. Well, guess what? You're going to actually create an environment where fewer people can buy houses, because if you start giving people a free $20,000 or $25,000 to buy houses in a market where there's already too many buyers, you're just going to drive up the prices of the houses even more. So it's the lack of understanding of the basic economic principles, and it's effectively people in a banking committee who don't actually work in real estate anymore, or they haven't worked in loans in their entire life, creating policy like this because it wins votes, right? It buys votes. They can go out to the populace and they can say, hey, look, we gave you $25,000 first-time homebuyer credit because we care about all you people that want to buy a house. You should vote for us. But what the voters don't do is they don't look at the next logical step and say, okay, well, by doing that, did you make houses more expensive or did you make houses less expensive? If they really wanted to solve the problem of housing, what they should be doing, instead of focusing on the demand side because they have to buy votes, they should actually be looking at the supply side. And the government should be saying, hey, how could we break down some of these walls, barriers, zoning issues, building regulations so that people can build more houses faster and cheaper? How could we credit every builder in America with $25,000 per property so they build them faster, and we help cut down the cost of building more housing, low to moderate income housing? How could we work on the supply side, right? But here's the problem. Politicians don't care about actually fixing the problem. They care about buying votes. And they know that there's a lot more would-be or wannabe first-time buyers than there is owners of development companies and contractor companies. So they're not actually trying to fix the problem, which our problem in America in housing is not on the demand side. There's plenty of demand. There's plenty of buyers for every house. Where the problem is on the supply side. So help the builders, help these cities get out of these draconian building laws. And it just blows my mind, right? Because in Southern California, there's a whole lot of houses that are 100 years old. There's a lot of bungalows, all across bungalows, craftsmen, 2-story houses, 1-story house. There's houses all over Southern California that were built between 1915 and 1940 before we had these insanely strict building laws. And guess what? 200 earthquakes later, they're not falling down. I never, ever, ever have a buyer that says, well, Scott, I was going to buy this house out in Pasadena, and it's beautiful, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it's at a price and a payment I can afford. But, you know, it was built in 1942 before the city of Los Angeles had 3,000 pages of building code. So I just don't feel comfortable living in the house. That's never happened in the history of the world. Ask any realtor. That just doesn't happen, right? So again, the problem is not on the demand side, which is where they're going with these policies. The problem is on the supply side. And further, my problem with this policy is the following. The policy is basically racist. Let's just call it what it is. Because if you go through the formula, it says a few things. It says, first of all, to be eligible for recipients, funds under this act can be provided to first-time buyers who meet income requirements. Okay, that's easy enough, right? Usually when they have these kind of bills come out, they talk about, hey, in order for you to be eligible for the grant money or the tax write-off or the stimulus money or whatever, you have to make under X amount of dollars. I don't really like how they set this up here, but let's just read through it. So funds of this act can be provided to first-time home buyers who meet income requirements and qualify as what the act terms first-generation home buyers. First-time home buyers are those who have not owned a home in the prior 3 years. Okay, so you can't have owned a home in the last 3 years. But if you go down a couple paragraphs, it says the Act's definition of first-generation home buyers is any individual whose parents or guardians never owned their own home during their lifetime, or they previously owned a home and it went into foreclosure or short sale. So let me just lay this out for you. If you're a working class individual who's saved your money, done good things with your credit, you're ready to buy a first-time house, you're ready to buy your first house, and you hear that there's this $25,000 first-time buyer credit or $20,000 first-time buyer credit, you're going to come to the lenders and the realtors and say, great, I want to take advantage of this first-time buyer credit. And we're going to have to ask you, hey, did your parents ever own a house? And if the answer is your parents had their shit together and they didn't spend a bunch of money on the Mercedes and instead they bought the Toyota, or, you know, they saved their money for a down payment, or they had the foresight to buy a house. If your parents made good financial decisions, need not apply, sir. This program is not for you. And to add insult to injury, if your parents owned a house and then let it go to foreclosure or short sale or deed in lieu of, okay, well, that's okay. Then you're considered a first-generation home buyer. Now, look, I will be the first one to admit there was a lot of banks, there was a lot of lenders that were doing some shady shit between 2004 and 2008, 2009, setting people up for failure by putting them into mortgages that they weren't going to be able to afford. Working in the industry, I accept that blemish, that dirty mark on our industry. However, there was also a lot of people that strategically defaulted on their mortgage. They took all the equity out of their homes. They treated their homes like a piggy bank to buy the RV and buy the Mercedes and buy the watches and keep up with the Joneses. And then when properties dropped, they just walked away from the property. Those people are being rewarded. Their children under this law would be considered first-generation homebuyers because your parents defaulted on their debt to the bank. Like, in what world does this make sense? But don't worry, it gets worse. Then it says, homebuyers may receive up to $20,000 in assistance or $25,000 if the homebuyer qualifies as socially and economically disadvantaged. The act defines socially disadvantaged as those who have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. An economically disadvantaged individual is one who meets the bill income. Okay, the income requirement is fine. That is what it is. If you want to help people who are poorer or poor get into houses, and that's kind of our social engineering of how we want to help people get out of poverty because home ownership definitely helps them get there. Fine, whatever. I disagree with it, but I can at least understand the premise. However, to throw in this little kicker where if you identify as Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, or any combination thereof, you will be presumed to meet this definition. Now, I want to just talk about how demeaning this is to any individual identifying as Black, Hispanic, Asian, American Native, or any combination thereof is presumed to meet this definition. And the definition up above is you are socially disadvantaged because you have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of the identity or a member of a group without regard to their individual qualities. So the bill is basically saying, if you identify as one of these minorities, we are going to assume that you have always been and will always be socially disadvantaged, and therefore we're going to give you an extra $5,000 to help you get into your first home. It's really gross because I know a lot of rich Black people. I know a lot of wealthy Hispanic people. I know a lot of wealthy Asian American people. I know a lot of poor white people. I know a lot of people that are on both sides of the spectrum on every race, ethnicity, color, creed, sexual preference. That does not define who you are financially. Now, we can go back historically and we can look at redlining and we can look at Jim Crow laws and we can say, absolutely, there was generations of people in the Black community that were not afforded the same access to home ownership. And that does in 2021 have a residual effect of net worth of Black families versus white families. 100% agree with that. But to think that we're going to counterbalance that by further discriminating and dividing and creating policy that makes people look at each other and have different financial advantages at the government level based on their ethnicity or their color of their skin, it's crazy. This is just going down that same path of ethnic politics, of dividing people up into different oppressed groups, having different financial outcomes for different groups. It's not what should have happened in the past. It's not what should happen today. And it's things like this that are going to further divide us as a country. And I think it's pretty scary when it starts to come out of large banking committees or large committees at the federal government, because I'll tell you, the first time I have to have a conversation as a lender and explain to somebody why they don't meet did your parent own or not own a house? What's the color of your skin? What ethnicity are you? Are you oppressed? As a loan officer, I don't want to have those conversations. I just see green. I don't care if you're Mexican, Black, purple, gay, straight, transsexual, midget, Hispanic, who's also a Pacific Islander. I don't care. I want to do a loan for everybody because when I close a loan, somebody gets into a home and I make money. So I don't want to have these conversations as a loan officer. I'm sure most of my realtor friends don't want to have these conversations either. And then when you start saying things like, well, do you identify as, I don't know, I'm like a fifth or a fourth or a third Mexican. I don't know. My grandfather took off the one who's Mexican. So I guess I could identify as a Mexican, even though I didn't grow up in the Mexican culture. Does that mean I would do it for an extra $5,000? I guess. I don't know. It's just the whole thing just seems like an act of virtue signaling. It seems like just pandering to the audience. And again, that's what politicians do, right? They pander for votes. They buy votes because everybody who's involved in this industry, realtors, builders, loan officers, title reps, escrow officers, everybody knows that there's not a demand problem. There's a supply problem. So if we've got $25,000 per transaction to divvy out in America in federal tax dollars. We should be divvying it out on building more housing so that all the people who want to buy a house can buy an affordable house versus pouring $25,000 of lighter fluid onto this problem, which is going to make houses more expensive, which is going to exacerbate the affordability problem, which is then going to have everybody turn around and say, see, housing is just a problem. We got to throw more money at it. And the cycle just continues and houses get more expensive and politicians never actually fix the problem, but they buy just enough votes to stay in office for 30 years or 40 years. Ugh, it's gross.